Hello to all and welcome to WED Talks, the monthly 1-hour masterclass on trending workplace topics. I'm Andrea Walls, Technical Writer and Communications Specialist for the County of Bucks. Thank you for attending this webinar hosted by the Bucks County Department of Workforce and Economic Development, known as WED, and PA CareerLink. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to introduce the Executive Director of WED, Billy Barnes.
Thank you for the introduction, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Bucks County Workforce Development Board and the county, I want to welcome everyone to today's WED Talk. Our discussion focuses on the most important considerations associated with the hiring process at your business or organization. The entire process, from job posting to job offer, is time-consuming and more complicated than simply reviewing resumes and conducting interviews. Business leaders are tasked with making critical decisions to help attract and retain high-quality employees. The specific elements of a hiring process are unique to each company, but there are general steps every business can follow to attract and hire qualified candidates. Our WED Talk presenter is here to discuss practical ways to maximize the chances of hiring the best applicant while minimizing the risk of claims and lawsuits. Let's introduce our expert who will lead today's discussion. Back to you, Andrea.
Thanks, Billy. I'm pleased to introduce today's WED Talk expert, an attorney from the prestigious law firm Duane Morris. Marc Scheiner practices in the area of employment law, counseling clients on a variety of employment issues. He represents clients in employment litigation matters and trains human resources professionals, in-house counsel, and supervisors on a range of workplace topics. Mr. Scheiner works with clients to ensure compliance with various state and local laws. He also assists clients in reviewing and drafting employment policies, handbooks, and agreements. Mr. Scheiner has volunteered or worked on pro bono matters for Canine Partners for Life, the Volunteer Lawyers Project of the Boston Bar Association, the Human Rights Campaign, Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, and the Mazzoni Center. He is also active as a mentor and advisor through his service on the board of directors of the Alumni Corporation of the University of Rochester chapter of Sigma Phi Epsilon. Welcome to WED Talks, Marc.
Andrea, thank you so much, and Billy as well. And thank you, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm still saying 3 years in that I want to be in person, and I hope that we get a chance to do that sometime. But we're still wherever we are in our various boxes and screens. So thank you for joining today. And like I said, I'm happy to be here. The hiring process. Today, we're calling this Navigating the Hiring Process from Job Posting to Job Offer. We have practically a snippet of time from my perspective. I could talk about this topic all day. For me, from my perspective in employment law, the hiring process captures so many different facets and aspects of HR issues. We have equal employment opportunity laws with non-discrimination in the background. We have issues about various and differing requirements depending on the state that you're in, depending on the city that you're in. And if you are an employer, as many are, who operate in different states or in different cities, different locations, you might have different laws. So we have applications to consider about what we could say, what we can't say in our interviews, on our applications. How do we conduct background checks? That comes part of the issue. The interview, what can we ask? What can't we ask? What are better ways of asking things? All sorts of things come into play, and I could be here all day long, but we only got an hour, so we're gonna make it work. So I hope you'll join me on this little adventure for today. So here's what I'm thinking for our session today, just to sort of lay this out. I want to take an approach that I hope is gonna be workable for today, to throw out some issues, say a little bit about it, help you get a sense of how we navigate, how I think about navigating the hiring process. I'm going to take the approach today of looking at mistakes to understand better approaches, to understand recommendations and practical approaches. My perspective in this area, like basically most areas, my practice focuses primarily on day-to-day HR counseling issues. And so I think about employment law. I have the law in the background, but most commonly when we're dealing with day-to-day HR issues, including the hiring process, we're thinking about practicalities. We're thinking about business issues. And yeah, we want to know what the law is. We need to stay compliant with it, absolutely. But each one of your organizations, and I don't know every one of your organizations, but I could still tell you this, I know each of your organizations operates differently from each other. And you have your own culture, you have your own expectations, you have your own sense of how you go about this process. So maybe some of what I'm going to say today is a reminder of what you're already doing. Maybe it's a reminder, oh, you know what, I was going to look into that or possibly tweak that. Maybe now's the time. Or maybe there's some new suggestions. But we're going to take a look at mistakes. I'm going to use a top 10 list, top 10 mistakes to look at, to sort of think about how to do this better. One thing I think will be pretty clear, but I'll say it from the get-go. This is not just about interviewing. A lot of the hiring process, I'm going to say perhaps the majority of the hiring process happens, well, certainly outside the interview, because the interview is just one small piece of it, but I think before the interview. And so we'll get to the interview, but probably not until halfway through today. That's one piece. It's a key piece. It's a critical piece, no question. A lot happens in the interview, but it's not the only piece. I already mentioned equal employment opportunity laws. I'm going to assume a little bit of basic background here, but we're just talking about non-discrimination laws. So each state, certainly from a federal law perspective, different cities as well, counties in Pennsylvania have this applicable as well, have a variety of anti-discrimination laws. So we have that in the background. We have it in the background that somebody who goes through our hiring process or an interview raises a complaint. And a discrimination case is usually in this context framed as a failure to hire claim. I am qualified for this position. I didn't get hired, and somebody who's not of my protected group got hired instead. Actually, I'm helping a client right now defend one of these. And in this instance that I'm working on, this applicant said she applied for 4 different positions over a period of time at this client. She was interviewed for one of them. She didn't get the job. She didn't get any of the jobs. She didn't get interviews 3 times, got one interview, didn't get the job. And she's saying it's because of her race and or her gender and or her disability status, which wasn't disclosed at any point. And that's an example of a failure to hire claim. And I'm helping my client figure out how to make it clear that those bases were not at all what weighed into this. It was, in this case, the way she interviewed and the way she answered questions and how other applicants did a better job of it. But that's in the background. And I'm going to, throughout, have an eye towards those types of claims and how we're going to work to mitigate against them. And having a good hiring process throughout is a great way of working with that. I'll also mention, probably you'll say it a few times, training managers. Training managers are other people who are involved in the hiring process, really critical, especially with the interview. But there's a lot of other pieces along the way. All right, so that's my kind of like overview introduction. I kind of dove right in. Andrea introduced me. And I'll also just say this little bit, please use the question box throughout. I'm not going to encourage you to ask questions at the very end, or at least to save your questions till the very end. Ask your questions throughout. I will have a little bit of time at the end for questions. I'll pause a few times for questions, but please pop your questions into the question box. I'll try to incorporate them as I go along. Otherwise, someone on the team here will read the question later. We'll get to them. So don't be shy. Ask your questions throughout is what I'm saying. We'll make it as interactive as possible. All right. So here are my top 10 mistakes in the interviewing and hiring process. Admittedly, they're probably not in rank order. They're conveniently in the order generally of the process unfolding from how we're starting thinking about who we want to hire. So we'll take it in that way, but here are those top 10 mistakes. Let's look at this process and figure out how to navigate it. So the first mistake, I think, is not thinking about who we want to hire. How do we make a good hire if we don't really even know who we are looking for? And by who we're looking for, I'm thinking about what kind of job duties are we looking to have filled? So here's my first to-do item for you on your kind of checklist, perhaps, of homework. Job descriptions. Do you have at your organization recently reviewed and updated job descriptions? Having a job description is really helpful. From a business perspective, it helps us figure out who we're looking for, what roles, what job duties need to be done. When somebody who is long tenured leaves a position and you need to fill that position all of a sudden, you know you have the big shoes to fill. But it's very common when someone's been in a position for a long time, this person left, you look at the job description, you think, gee, Suzanne's leaving, but there's a lot of things in this job description that she actually didn't do. And there's a lot of things she did do that aren't in this job description. Fine, that's how things develop. But what do we now need? Do we need somebody more aligned with the job description as it exists? Do we need something more in line with what Suzanne had been doing? Do we need something else? This helps us figure out who we're looking for. It's hard to assess a candidate if we don't really know who we're looking for by job skills, job duties. From a legal perspective, we also want to include things like, what are the essential functions of the job? We're not going to get too much into the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, but we'll talk a little bit about it. It's a key issue to focus on later. But this is a great place to note, what are the essential functions of this job? Because if we need to accommodate somebody with a reasonable accommodation for a disability reason, let's say, we might need to think about what job duties are ones that we could work to accommodate and what job duties might we just not be able to accommodate. Let's also think about remote work. I know, I didn't mention COVID at all on my slides. And at the same time, I just said the word. So I hope I'm not gonna go down any kind of COVID rabbit hole right now with you. All of us, I'm sure, are in a variety of different situations with whether we're fully back in person, whether we're fully remote, hybrid, some variation in between. It's all over the board still, I'm finding. But lots of different roles went remote. Does this particular role that you're looking to hire have the ability to go remote? Is it fully remote? Is it not at all able to be remote? I would capture that in a job description. That's another piece that I think uses could use some updating and looking at if you haven't in a while. Job postings. Let's have a job posting reflect the job description and the skills, qualifications, job duties that we need. What we capture there, a little bit of business or marketing and recruitment efforts, but just having in mind who we're looking to hire, what skills and functions we need filled will be very helpful. I mentioned requirements here on the slides for salary transparency laws. Not too many jurisdictions just yet, but I don't know if we're seeing a trend, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have this conversation in 2 or 3 years and could be saying, we're seeing a trend towards more of these. This is some kind of requirement. New York City has something along these lines. Colorado, in particular, has something along these lines recently, where employers are being required to post information about salary ranges for a particular position. So I make mention of that as well. Also, diversity considerations. More and more of our organizations are thinking about diversity initiatives, equity initiatives. Where are we posting? I have a number of clients over the years who say to me, we would love to increase the diversity of our workforce. Great, wonderful effort. But we can't just all of a sudden change the makeup of our workforce demographics. How do we start with that process? To me, it starts with the hiring process. And it starts with this, the job postings. Where are we posting? Or from where are we recruiting if we're going to colleges or local schools or trade organizations? Where are we posting and seeking applicants from? I throw in this question, just for your own consideration, about the pros and cons of internal recruiting and referrals. We have great employees, we might say. I hope that's the case. We have great employees. You should have great employees. We have great employees. So let's look to our employees and can get them to consider making referrals. Bring your friend, bring colleagues who you know to us who you think would be great for our organization. Maybe there'll be a referral bonus, even better. Wonderful. We get great people from the great people we already have. Good. But let's think about the flip side. We're going to look at what I call unconscious bias, or what is called unconscious bias. We tend to, as humans, gravitate, have an affinity towards people that are similar to us in various ways. And I'm not talking necessarily about demographic groups like based on sex or gender or race, age, religion, etc., but just people, the way their demeanors are. We have similar backgrounds. We grew up in similar places. We went to the same school. And more we find, oh, these folks are pretty similar in their styles and kind of who they are. And we might not actually be getting the diversity that we actually say we want by looking just to our current employees. So I just think it's worth considering that if diversity initiatives are on your mind, how we want to approach that. Okay, we're gonna keep moving. Another mistake, my number 9 mistake, is not screening applicants properly. So we first want to focus on job qualifications. Again, it goes right back to our job description, it goes back to our job posting, and each organization is going to do this differently. Each company is going to decide if it's going to be a screening team, or you might be using a computer system, screening out resumes or applications that don't meet certain criteria. We said we required 3 years of experience. We prefer 5 years of experience. This person has 2 years of relevant experience. Okay, we're going to reject their application on that basis. I see a glaring typo. I'm not telling you you have to reject a resume for a typo, but I'm not telling you you can't reject a resume for having a typo. I was part of a conversation. I'm on the hiring committee of my law firm, and we interview and hire law students every year for summer associate positions. And I remember a few years back having an argument about a typo on a resume and whether that should be problematic and disqualifying potentially. There were differing views. Doesn't matter how it turned out. I had a client raise this issue as well, and they said it was disqualifying. And when that was raised for some discussion during a team meeting, the person said, well, but the position they were applying for was a copy editor position. Copy editor, lots of attention to detail. If you can't get your own resume correct, that you had lots of time to look over and prepare, are we comfortable with your abilities and judgments? I think that's reasonable to say, no, we're not going to move forward with that person. You could decide from a business perspective what your qualifications are. We're certainly not making any kind of discriminatory decisions, of course, that's in the background, but having general baselines to screen people out, 3 years of experience, 5 years of experience, something relating to this industry, I need to see a certain certification, all those things could happen. You might get to a point, let's just say with experience, it's just one factor. I don't want to make it seem as if it's the only factor. But let's say you have a really well-qualified applicant pool, and you said 3 years required and 5 years preferred, but you, on that basis, still have 40 resumes. Could you increase your requirement effectively to 7 years? And sometimes there's debate, well, why should we go up to 5 years and screen out people who have less than 5 years of experience if we only require 3? Well, you had a great applicant pool. So you need at least 5, or maybe you need 7 to move forward in the process. Lots of business issues. Will the salary properly match? Will you be getting a person at the right level and experience to fill this role coming in with these different changes? Those are reasonable questions, but you can make these different distinctions because they're non-discriminatory bases for making a decision and cutting people from the process. So you want to think about what those screens are to move past and reject people. But you might find an exception. This person only has 2.5 years of experience, but they have a very particular skill set, it seems. They worked in this industry that we're in, and they were a Peace Corps volunteer. All these things together make me think, I want to really interview this person. But they don't have our 3 years of required experience. Okay, we'll make an exception. We'll document why we're making this exception, because this person didn't make it through our initial screen, but we want to bring them in for an interview anyway. Totally fine. Of course, if you have so many exceptions that you're documenting 5 or 6 different exceptions for bringing people in for an interview, you probably had the wrong screen to start with, and you want to maybe rethink that. How about gaps in resumes? This has been coming up more often, even pre-COVID. People take time off from work for all sorts of legitimate, real reasons. It could be relating to birth, adoption, foster care placement of children. It could be relating to somebody's own health condition or a family member's health condition. It could be periods of unemployment, like COVID. What are our approaches to gaps in resumes? I've heard over the years, not more than X number of months. Not saying that's a problem, and if done consistently as a screen, probably okay. But let's just think about from a business perspective, who are we screening out if we are saying a gap of 6 months in employment history is problematic? I think on average, we're going to find that this is disproportionately impacting our female applicants who have taken time off after childbirth. Or it's going to impact disproportionately folks who have medical issues or disabilities because they needed time off for health issues. And so I want to just pose that as a question to think about on your end. All right, number 8 mistake, not being aware of unconscious bias. I mentioned this in passing already. This is preferring people who are similar to us. It's affinity bias, unconscious bias. If it was conscious bias, if I said, hey, I really only like people of various national origins or sexual orientations or religions, well, that's discrimination. That's conscious bias. That's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about, I like people, I'll go back to my example of being on the hiring committee, speaking to law students. I like a candidate to come in and tell me a story. I want them to come in and weave together their experience, their interests, their reason for wanting to work at our law firm. Some of my colleagues want to know more about grades and tell me about your paper in this class, and let's talk about analyzing some aspect of the law. It's not a right or wrong way. There's just different approaches. But if I constantly have the same people asking the same questions, again, not a problem. Maybe that's your culture or what you need at your organization. But in our culture, if we all were analytical and all just wanted to get into the details and look at your grades and ask about each of your classes, we might be missing the storytellers. We might be missing the people who just have different skill sets. By coming together and having a variety of interviewers with different styles and different backgrounds and different preferences, we're helping to mitigate against this unconscious bias. We're not just hiring people who Mark likes, we're hiring people who we all like or like enough. And this actually helps us think about defending against failure to hire claims. When we show thoughtfulness in the process, multiple interviewers, or maybe different levels of screening. Another way that companies have done this more and more is having a screening team in the recruiting wing of HR or however you work. Maybe it's just you, the HR department of one. I know is very common. And I think for a lot of organizations, you might be the HR department of one, or you might be the CFO, who's also effectively the HR director. Totally get it. But however you're screening resumes or applications, you might want to think about maybe having another person involved, maybe having somebody look over without a name, without any kind of identifying information to see if that makes any kind of difference. I also think just being aware that unconscious bias, implicit bias exists helps to mitigate against it. If we're aware of it, we could start thinking about how to be more conscious of not letting that impact us and our decisions too much. I'm throwing in social media background checks here. I had to mention it somewhere, and I didn't want to make it a big rabbit hole to go down. There's two rabbit holes, social media and COVID. I wanted to avoid both of them today. Social media background checks, we'll talk more about background checks later on in the process, but oftentimes I still hear managers who get resumes or applications in, get it down to a reasonably, small number, but maybe not small enough, and they want to Google everybody. They want to Facebook search everybody, etc. Or maybe they have the list of people who are going to come in for interviews this week. Let me just take a peek at their Facebook pages. Let me just look at what I can find on Google. Don't do this. Managers should not be doing this, I think, at all. But I certainly would say to you, if social media background checks are going to be any part of your process, the time to do that is later on in the process, when you have a small group of finalists post-interview, not at this point in the process, and certainly not by managers or others who are going to be interviewing. Not everything online is true. I used to sort of make a quip about that, but we just know it to be a fact, right? It's factually accurate to say a lot of stuff online is inaccurate. So we don't know that what's out there is actually true. We might learn things by doing these kinds of searches that we don't need to know and we don't want to know. Maybe I'm doing this because I don't care what's on your Facebook page. And I'm saying Facebook, I don't know. That's still the ubiquitous social media platform from my perspective. I know people of various ages, groups, demographics, whatnot, have moved on from Facebook, that's fine. There's something else out there. But I don't care what your page shows. I just want to get some sense of judgment. Okay, well, you're getting some sense of judgment by what this person is posting, but they're also mentioning the 5K race that they ran recently to raise money for some kind of cancer prevention program or cystic fibrosis. Name your disease condition. Well, now, does this person have this condition? Do they have a family member who does? I don't know, but this is not information you need or want your managers who are going to be interviewing to have. It's just not necessary, and it complicates a potential later case should there be one. Don't want to have this involved. If you have questions about this, pop it into the chat box, but I'm going to move on so we don't accidentally fall down the social media hole. Number 7 mistake, not requiring all applicants to complete an application. This might seem obvious to many folks, but there are still some organizations I see who focus on resumes and don't want to have applications filled out or don't require them. I had a client some years ago say that we understand we should have applications filled out, but we actually do it once the person's hired and they're being onboarded. That is not common, but I'd rather have that than not have an application at all. Applications are legal documents. Somewhere on your application, look at the end, there's a signature line, and above that signature line is some version of everything above is true and accurate as best as I could report it. And if it's not true, if it turns out to be inaccurate, I could be not hired, or I could be terminated for falsifying my application. So that's a legal statement with a sign off. That's a legal document. I think that's good to have. And practically from a business perspective, applications allow us to ask everybody the same questions and get answers to those same questions. List your last 5 jobs is what an application might say. That's different than somebody listing 5 jobs in their resume, because they might choose to list the 5 jobs that are most relevant to this job, or the 5 jobs that gave them the most experience, or that were industry specific. That might not be bad, but it's not the same question, and it's a different way of presenting it. And in the application, you might see short stints of employment more easily than you'd see them on the resume. This doesn't have to impact what you do with that information, but at least it's giving you, from a practical business perspective, the same information from everybody. We want to think about some stumbling blocks with some newer laws focused on criminal convictions and salary history inquiries. We'll talk about that in another top 10 mistake very shortly, so I'll leave it here for now. We'll also come back to background checks when we think about job offers, but let me just say this. I still see in the signature block on applications some language to the effect of, we're going to do background checks as part of our hiring process, and that you will have to go through these background checks before you can start employment with us should we give you an offer. And, signing below authorizes us to do that. Very clearly want to let you know, if you're not aware already, first of all, homework assignment, go check your signature box on your application to make sure that language is not there. Or if it is there, just know that is not sufficient authorization, that is not sufficient disclosure to conduct the background checks that you might want to do. So you still have to give a separate disclosure to somebody at the proper time and get a separate authorization. Signing off on a resume, or sorry, on an application is not sufficient for that purpose. I'll come back to that, but I'm just making that note as we go along. All right, let's keep it going. Number 6 mistake, not being aware of the new or the newer laws. Some of these laws are brand new. Last I checked, there were about 14 jurisdictions, I'm not sure if that was including DC or not at this point, that had limitations on salary inquiries, which we'll talk about next. A greater number of states and cities have restrictions on what we call ban the box laws. Ban the box laws are referencing boxes on applications that oftentimes in the past, and still do in some locations, have a box that says, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Or something to that effect. Have you ever been convicted of a crime? Sometimes it has there. Yes, no. And these jurisdictions have banned the box, right? Banned asking on your application about criminal convictions. And Some states still allow it. Most states actually still allow it. But a growing number, this is definitely a trend, are removing this from applications, saying you cannot ask somebody about their criminal conviction status on the application. The EEOC has come out and said, from their perspective, from federal law, that you can't run a criminal background check until somebody gets a conditional offer of employment. You have to make the offer of employment to this person, conditioned on them successfully completing a criminal background check. So you can't run the check as part of deciding if you want to hire them. You can't consider arrests, you need convictions. And ultimately, if you get a background check back and you see that somebody has some kind of conviction, you need to consider how serious the offense is. Typically, we're looking at felonies and not misdemeanors. How long ago the offense happened or the sentence was completed. Typically, anything within 7 years is considered recently enough, sometimes 10. Sometimes jurisdictions have different restrictions on that as far as how far back you could look. 7 to 10 years is what we're talking about as reasonable. Longer than that, and it's considered an older conviction. And what is the connection to the job? This is often the most difficult one to assess, but also where this often will turn. Somebody is convicted of some kind of theft, and it's a felony theft, and it's recently enough. I think most clients that I work with would say, you know what, recent, serious, and theft is about honesty. And we don't want dishonest people working here. We're not gonna move forward with this person. We're gonna withdraw the offer of employment. Okay, now, somebody was convicted of some kind of DUI, driving kind of conviction. It's serious, it's recent. Is it connected to their job? Well, they drive a forklift. That might be more connected. They drive our company vehicle to visit clients in various locations. That's certainly connected to their job. They don't drive at all. They just have to get to our place of employment safely. That's their own responsibility. This might not be connected to their job. At the same time, people might look at DUIs and say, that's about judgment. Maybe it's a character issue, you might say. That's putting other people at risk by acting irresponsibly. I want to withdraw the offer on that basis. That's a real gray area. I would suggest, look for some consistency. You might not have a chance to decide what you want to do until your first instance of this comes up. Try to be consistent in how you approach these things. There is room for interpretation. There is a room for discretion, but it's also a tricky area. A lot of these laws have been passed to protect disparate impact or perceived disparate impact on people of certain races, ethnicities, national origins in particular. And we want to be aware of that, what the reasoning is, so we can think about that as well. But try to have a consistent approach here. And more, if you're in a jurisdiction that has laws like this and you want to consider background checks and criminal conviction issues as part of your process, you might want to consult with outside counsel or in-house counsel if you haven't dealt with this before. Also newer law are salary inquiry laws or pay history laws or variations of those names. More and more locations are having these, and this is basically a prohibition on asking what somebody is currently earning. The idea behind this is we have an idea about what we are looking to hire this incoming employee at, a wage level or a salary level, but then we find out, wow, they're making a lot less income than we thought they were at their current job. Maybe we could get away with paying them a little under our range, save on the budget. That's what's behind this. In particular, looking at disparate pay impacts and disequity among male and female employees. And so some states and locations say you can't ask about salary history or pay history, but if somebody offers it, you can use it and rely on it. And some locations say you can't ask about it, you can't rely on it, even if it was voluntarily provided. You need to look into various states in which you operate. And with all of these issues, the ban the box laws, the salary history laws, across the board, what states are you in? If you're in multiple states, you want to think about how to approach this. Maybe you have different applications for different states, That's possible. Maybe you say, you know what, we want the same application for everybody. We want the same standards across our entire company, across the country. That's fine too, but you're going to have to look to the state with the most stringent requirements and make your applications with that in mind, the same across the board. All right, that's more legal stuff than I like to get into sometimes, but it's important, so throw it out there. We're getting closer to the interview now. So my fifth mistake in our top half here is not thinking through your interview approach. This kind of aligns with who are we looking to hire? What kind of organization are we? Who are we? How long should our interviews be? Who should be interviewing? Should it be one person, a team of people? Are there 2 rounds of interviews? Are there 3 rounds of interviews? Are we just having a big job fair and we're going to have everybody from HR interview candidates? Because this is a position that's an entry-level, lower-level position that has a significant amount of turnover, and we don't need to meet with people for more than 20, 25 minutes. That's fine. Or maybe this is a manager-level position, and we need several rounds of interviews, and we need to think about in-depth behavioral interviewing questions. That's fine too. When I moved to Philadelphia many years ago, more than I like to count now, although it's going on 20, close to that, the whole departments of the law firm I ultimately was hired at, the whole department had a chance to interview me. So I thought I was going to interview with 4 people in 4 different time slots. It was 3 or 4 people in each of those 4 time slots. That was the culture of that organization. I'm not suggesting that matches your needs or your culture, but having thought through this, I think, is helpful. Diversity considerations, you might want to think about to what extent you want to have a diverse team of interviewers. Uniform questions, similar to using an application, this helps us with knowing we're asking the same questions to everybody and giving everybody a fair chance to answer them. Maybe it's better for comparison purposes. That also helps structure the interview for especially interviewers who are less experienced. Here's what I have to ask and get through. Here's what I have to capture. Real benefits to that. But I would just caution here that if it becomes too stilted, if your interviewer is so worried about getting the exact notes down about what this person's saying to the question that they're missing obvious follow-up questions, or they're not really listening to the information being given, that's not helpful. Note-taking, take your notes not on a resume. That's part of the person's file. That's going to be saved in their file. You don't want it marked up in a way that it was not presented to you. The application is a legal document. We mentioned that already. Don't mark up a legal document. Let's keep it how it was given to us. Take notes on a separate piece of paper, is what I would recommend. And those notes are there to jog your memory later on when you're making your recommendation about whether or not to bring this person back for the second round or to make an offer of employment or not. Those notes are to jog your memory for that purpose. Once you've made that recommendation, once you've had your memory jogged, you could get rid of those notes. They were just there for that one purpose. They've served their purpose. You don't need them any longer. But if you've written on the person's resume or application and that's part of their file, then those notes are going to be there. And you might not like what those notes say when you're in your deposition defending your failure to hire case a year later. Don't write on the applications or resumes. That's a long story short. I'll skip the additional war stories for right now. And I just will throw in the online considerations, whether it's that people have the right access to the cameras that they need or the right system that they need. Make sure you have downloaded what you need, the updated Zoom, or have the candidates do that. So there's as few glitches as possible. But whether you're remote or partially remote, online interviewing I think is more and more common, and to some extent I think is here to stay. All right, let's get to the interview finally. Not training our interviewers properly is my mistake number 4 that I'm listing here. Although, I don't know, it's hard to sort of say which one I would make, a top one of the real top mistakes, but this is probably the top 3 for sure. You need to train your interviewers. Yeah, people could be less experienced. Yes, people might like interviewing more or less. People might be having personalities that are more conducive to being the people you want face-to-face with applicants or not. All that's fine, but let's make sure we know how our interviewers need to operate. Impermissible questions, EEO related. Well, you can't ask somebody what their EEO demographic information is. You can't ask someone what their age is. Someone might say, well, the federal law only protects people who are 40 years of age or older. That might be true, but what about your state law? That might not be that same limitation. And even still, why are you asking the person what their age is? But along those lines, don't we kind of get sometimes information that gives us a good idea about what a person's age might be, even if we don't directly ask them? And the answer is, yeah, that happens all the time. And how does that happen? Most commonly, I think it happens when our less experienced or untrained manager is making small talk, right? Oh, look, you went to the same school I did. When did you graduate? People go to college, let's say, or school, or whatever the situation is at different times in their lives. But there's a rough general time when people do that. And there's a rough approximation about what the person's age might be based on their answer, if they answer it. And so, okay, I know this person went to college, graduated in 1980. Maybe I've even marked it down on the resume, right? Don't do that. But now you've asked a question that goes towards age. And you were just trying to make small talk. Oh, look, we have something in common. Do we know the same people? Do we go to campus around the same time? That's not helpful. And so by asking that kind of question, you're getting somewhere that you don't need to get to. Somebody mentions, oh, nice family photo. Oh, thank you. That was last summer's vacation. Do you have kids? Are you married? We're getting information we don't need and we don't want to have out as part of this process. Other things to ask about, stay away from these things. Permissible questions. At some point, you go through all the things people can ask, and they worry that, what do I do? Give me the questions to ask. There's a lot of things to ask about. What are your current skills? What's your prior experience? Where are you working now? Why do you want to leave your current position? What are you looking for? Where do you want to be in 2, 3, 5 years, whatever it might be? Why here? Why our company? All these things are relevant. All these things are reasonable. All these things are things that I think should be asked. If you have a concern, especially if we're talking about a more physical position, about somebody being able to meet essential job functions, it's okay to ask about them. Here's a job description, or you were given a job description. Did you have a chance to review it? Are you able to meet the requirements of the job duties? Oh, that's fine. Maybe it's about values, goals, interests, all these types of questions, lots here to choose from, lots of permutations within there, lots of things to ask, in other words. Situational behavioral questions I want to highlight briefly. I think these are really useful. I think they're especially useful for people who are interviewing for manager level positions, even lower level manager positions. These are our questions about, tell me about a situation where you had to struggle against multiple deadlines at the same time. Tell me about a situation where you got some negative feedback that you had to address and make a change. Tell me about a time where you had to give someone some negative feedback. Tell me about a time where you weren't sure how to proceed with something and you had to find your way through. How'd you do that? These are questions that reflect on someone's prior experience and their skill sets, but in this behavioral situational way that, first of all, allow them to tell a story. I like to use these in my interviews, but also I think gives you insight into how this person thinks. You might actually, I've sometimes done this, use a situation that happened recently or that you've dealt with recently. And if you choose to do something like that, I think it matters less that the person gets it right from your perspective, but it does give you a chance to think about, well, how are they viewing the situation? How do they approach the situation? How do they think? How do they operate? How would that work here? So I think it really helps give some insight. And I say this is great for manager level positions because these are the folks who are going to be, hopefully, making judgments and having discretion and thinking through some things. And so I think those are great questions to consider asking. All right, I'm not seeing questions pop up. So either we're just kind of rolling with it and going along with me for the ride, or you're going to save them for the end a little bit. That's okay. Just noting, and I'll mention again, feel free to pop in any questions you have into our question box. All right, number 3 mistake, not being prepared for applicant disclosures. And these are applicant disclosures I'm thinking of that happened during the interview. Somebody says, oh, by the way, I know it's not stated there explicitly, but I can't work on Sundays, religious accommodation, religious reasons. I need an accommodation. If you're going to schedule me on Sundays, I have religious services, I can't be there. Or I can't work certain nights or weekends, certain things along those lines. Those things could be about scheduling. Now, look, if your position is a weekend position, this could be a reason to reject this person. If it's just generally, Monday through Friday position, or whatever, Wednesday through Sunday, whatever it might be, maybe this does come up in some way. And those are sometimes things to work around. Maybe it's a question about whether this is a particular shift or an essential function. Most commonly, this is popping up in the area of disability or medical condition. I am qualified for the job. We've talked all about it, but I just want to let you know one thing. I'm currently being treated for a kidney condition, and I go for dialysis treatments twice a week on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. So I'm going to need to leave the office around 3 o'clock on those 2 days. You certainly did not ask, because you've trained, well, not you, but your representative, the person in the interview, your manager, your employee, the interviewer, did not ask, do you have any disabilities? Tell me if you have any medical conditions. Of course they didn't ask that, because you've trained them, right? And they should know better anyway. But in response to no question, just talking about scheduling or the job or expectations, they mention this kidney condition. They mention the dialysis treatment. You've just had a disability, a medical condition, and possibly the need for an accommodation disclosed to you. You didn't ask for it. You didn't want to know it. And you can't make a decision on that basis. And if you didn't know, I'm telling you, you can't make a decision on that basis, because that could be, if you said, well, this person has a kidney issue, they have to be out. And you know what? I'm worried that it's not just an hour or two of schedule shifting for 2 days a week. I'm worried this could be more serious. I'm worried they might be out for a period of leave. Who knows what's going to happen here? I don't want to take a chance. I'm not going to hire this person for this reason. If that's the basis for your decision here, that could be a discrimination claim just waiting to happen on the basis of disability. How do you respond to an applicant disclosure? I might ask you, and I might ask for a response if we were able to talk live. Here's what I would say. You want to document that. I only use the word documentation, I think once, maybe twice in this slide deck, but it's one of my favorite words because I'm an HR lawyer. I love documentation. You want to document this. If you ignore it, if this person makes this disclosure, you move forward, you don't recommend them for hire because they don't really meet the qualifications of the job, and they want to bring a claim, I'm not saying they win, but why didn't you capture that somehow? Well, it wasn't really relevant. Okay, but it really was mentioned, and it was certainly an awkward 2 minutes of a 25-minute interview. By capturing that this happened contemporaneously, soon after the interview, I think that you are creating a good document. I love email, it's time and date stamped. And after this interview, saying, in response to no question that I asked, Mark made this disclosure about this kidney condition and dialysis, et cetera, I want to let you know, he made the disclosure. I didn't respond further. I simply said, if there's any kind of schedule issues, accommodation issues, that'll be discussed with HR later on in the process. And we got back to the interview. And I'm not using that to make any determination about hiring him, but I don't think we should hire him because he's not really qualified for this position, for this reason. That's a great document. Does it win your case? I don't know, but I think it's helpful. So don't be shy about documenting that, but don't, of course, get into the conversation. You can ask someone if they could do the essential functions, but you can't ask about their mental, physical disabilities, conditions, etc. And you don't want to follow up any kind of disclosure with asking more questions about it. All right. Not understanding restrictions with the background checks. We're finally getting to a conditional offer letter. If you're thinking offer letter without conditioned in front of it, I want to just suggest that we get used to saying conditional offer letter. Unless you do not do background checks at all, and you don't do any kind of physical assessments, and you don't do any drug testing, then maybe you're just giving an offer letter. But if you have one of those things or something similar, you're giving a conditional offer letter, because the job offer, you're making the job offer, you're hiring the person, but it's conditioned upon them successfully completing these background checks, testing, assessments, etc. This is where you need to give somebody, along with the conditional offer letter, the disclosure about what kind of background checks you're going to be doing. We're going to be doing a criminal background check. And because you're applying for a high-level management position, we're going to do a financial background check. We're going to verify your employment and your academic information that you listed on your resume and application. You need to disclose that, and you need to get a sign-off to authorize that being done. Drug and alcohol testing is a whole nother hour that we could talk about, especially with marijuana issues. If you follow that at all, or if you're working in multiple states, that's a tricky issue right now. I'm just gonna make note and say nothing more about it right now. We could talk at least another hour about it. Drug and alcohol testing, if you're gonna do it, again, has to be done after a conditional offer letter is provided. In other words, you can't use the results of a background check or drug and alcohol testing to decide if you're going to hire somebody. If they pass these, then they're hired. It was conditioned on those things. They passed them, they're hired. Other things you'll capture in the conditional offer letter are things that I listed here. Of course, there might be other specifics that you might mention, but these are some basics that I think belong in the offer letter. All right, let's get to my number one reason. And this is for real. If not the number one reason, it's certainly, again, the top 2 or 3, along with training managers for the interviews. Not recognizing potential danger zones, especially around non-discrimination issues. Here are some examples. We talked about the like me bias. If I am so wrapped up in my personal comfort level, I just feel connected to this person. This was a great interview, great applicant. If I'm using that repeatedly and solely or primarily to decide who I'm hiring, I think we're going to be getting into hiring people that are just like me. And whether that's about demographic groups, whether that's about background, skill sets, experiences, the ways we operate, the ways we think, we're not getting the diverse mix of people that we want. Again, my view of diversity here is not just about demographic groups. It's actually not primarily about that. It's about backgrounds, experiences, skill sets. It's about hiring the engineer for your HR team, because you could teach some of the HR laws, but you really need somebody right now who's very analytical, who has a lot of background and maybe helping with a system or starting something new, and maybe this person is that person. Another example I throw out is the overqualified candidate. We could talk about this for a while, but I'll just say people who exceed significantly what you're looking for as far as requirements for skills or qualifications, yeah, they might not be the right person, but they might be the perfect person. The concerns that come up here is this person is going to be looking for too much by way of salary or wages. This person is not going to stick around. This person was a prior manager, and now they're applying for a lower level position in this department. Otherwise, they look great, but I have these concerns. Well, you know what? If you have those concerns, I have the best way for you to address those. Bring them in for an interview and ask them about it. You might find that this applicant is looking to shift things up. The director of HR does not have in her organization the same level of contact with employees that she likes. And by going to a lower level position, she's now going to be working with the employees directly as opposed to managing the people who do. And the manager position she's leaving has a lot of administrative BS. That's a term of art. Administrative stuff that she doesn't like doing, and she wants to just really, again, be hands-on with employees. And this could be a great match, but let's not look past that. And the number one thing that I want to mention here is the bad fit, or bad cultural fit, or bad fit for our organization, some version of that. What does bad fit mean? Now, you have some variation of what it means. Oh, the culture, the personality. I know the people here. I'm not sure this person's going to jive with them in some way. That to me is shorthand. That's actually really unhelpful shorthand. I'm going to really push back and encourage you to say what you mean by bad fit. Don't write bad fit in your recommendation or whatever internal paperwork you're using to decide if this is the right person for this position. What does bad fit mean? I'll tell you what it means. It means whatever that unhired applicant and their attorney want it to mean. Bad fit doesn't mean didn't answer the questions well, didn't have any questions to ask, asked me questions about the company that are on the front page of our website that they should have known already. All right, seemed condescending to the staff as they were walking through our plans. All those are fine things to capture. All those are reasonable reasons to not hire somebody. But bad fit, this person says, well, look around, everybody's much younger than me. Look around, everybody's of a different race generally. There's not much diversity here, and I stand out. Bad fit is about my sexual orientation, my religion, my ethnicity, my race, the fact that I'm older. That's not what you think it meant. That's not what you meant it to me at all. So don't be sloppy here. Give a reason, articulate a reason why this person is not a so-called bad fit. Don't let this applicant and perhaps plaintiff suggest later what it means. A few other things on that slide.
Mark, we wanted to jump in here. We have about 5 minutes left. I know quite a few people probably have 10 o'clocks to get to, or whatever time zone they're in.
I'm on that, and I don't see any questions, so I'm going to keep going.
We do have a few. We do have a few.
Okay.
Unless you answer these, I don't know if I could. Yeah. And I want to get to those.
Great.
So
go ahead.
Great. So the first question, if you didn't answer this, how do you handle a situation where the candidate volunteers their age? Depending on the role and the age, that could color an interviewer's thoughts.
Yeah, I think just like the disclosures of disability or medical condition, if they disclose that, I wouldn't follow up with it further, but I would make a note and document it separately.
Thank you. Another question, is OneNote an acceptable tool to use for documentation?
I don't know what OneNote is, but I know some systems, are used computer-wise. I would say I would like to see one interviewer's notes kept separate from other interviewers, and it's okay to share them at some later point, but I don't want one interviewer to be biased in any way by what others have said. So only look at others' notes after you've interviewed. As long as that's separated, that's fine. And thank you for jumping in. I don't see these questions, so I'm glad you got them.
No, this is great. Thank you so much. And then just a comment, you're doing great, Mark. Thank you for this. Great ideas.
Okay. Okay. Oh, those are the questions? Okay, super.
That's it.
All right, I'll wrap up. I have this bonus mistake. I think part of the hiring process extends beyond the job offer and even beyond the person starting. So think about all your materials from start to finish, but in particular, I throw out to you for consideration how you're doing orientation, how you're doing integration, maybe how you're doing mentoring. I think the process continues even after somebody begins to onboard them effectively. And finally, and then ask some more questions, I just have some key takeaways. You can look at these later if you like. I remind you that a lot of this process takes place outside the interview. There's laws in the background that we have to consider, even if we're focused on a lot of the business issues. That's basically what's on these slides, reminders and takeaways. I mentioned already about training interviewers. I think it's critical. I think we didn't spend as much time as maybe we would in a full-blown training in person if we were doing that on impermissible questions and handling the disclosures, questions that come up. But making sure people know how to handle that is really important. I mentioned unconscious bias. You might be thinking about diversity and inclusion issues. Those are other things to consider. And as I say, as my sort of smiley last note, employment laws change and they keep changing. So you should be worried enough about these concerns, but don't worry too much if something seems a little bit off because it's going to change soon enough anyway. We can have the same conversation a year or two from now and we'll have more things to say for sure. All right, that's what I have, just kind of,
Great.
In time. But
thank you, Mark.
any more questions, feel free.
Two more things before we hand it over to Andrea. Mark, people wondered if they could get a copy of your slides. I do know that you gave those to Andrea. Andrea, will those be given to all the attendees?
Yes, I can have those available for anyone who wants them. And just a reminder as well that all of our WED Talks are available on the PA Career Link YouTube channel. So you will be able to watch that on demand whenever you'd like.
Oh, super.
Great. And you will receive an email with the recording within 24 hours, everybody who attends or does not attend. And Mark, there are a couple, maybe you could do one more question. Follow up to the age question. If there is a role that a firm is looking to groom into a more senior role down the line, do you open yourself to a lawsuit if a candidate comes out and says something like, I'm already 70 years old, I probably have 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't make a decision on that basis, but at the same time, if somebody is saying effectively, put their age aside, I'm only seeing myself working here for 2 or 3 years, take the 70 out of it, that might not be the person you're looking for. You want somebody who's thinking about a long-term tenure. I don't think age means not long-term tenure. I don't want to say, well, the person who's 70 is not going to be here for 10 years. I wouldn't take that approach. But if someone says to you, I'm only going to be here for 2 or 3 years, I think that's something you consider. So it gets nuanced, but I think that's an approach I would say.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Okay, Andrea, did you want to introduce the next Wed Talk?
Yes, I'd also like to thank you, Mark, on behalf of our audience here today for some wonderful information that we can put into practice immediately. And I'd also like to invite everyone to join us for our next WED Talk on Wednesday, June 14th. Public relations experts Ellen Langus and Kristen Stewart from Newsoma Communications will share actionable marketing strategies for small businesses. Look for a registration link coming soon on the calendar events page at www.buckscounty.gov/PA career link. Thanks everyone and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. And thanks for the invitation again. Glad to be here.